Hi everyone, welcome to our summer session number 5. We're going to be talking about multi-generational making, what it means when not just kids come through your space, but parents, caregivers, community members, and how to kind of actively engage a wide range of participants in making. And so we have awesome people from all over on the call to share their expertise, their experience, and we'll let the three sites introduce themselves. Let's start with Lindsay, and then we'll hop over to Rebecca in Pittsburgh, and then our last but not least, Rebecca.
Thank you. My name is Lindsay Balfour. I'm an educator, innovation tech specialist at the Children's Creativity Museum in San Francisco.
Hi, we're at Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. My name is Rebecca Grabman. I manage our makerspace, MAKESHOP. And these are some of our MakerCorps members.
Hey, I'm Lydia. I'm from the Pittsburgh area. I'm just a college student too.
My name is Kyle. I'm also a MakerCorps member for the summer. I'm originally from Chicago, but I'm here in Pittsburgh.
And I'm Rebecca Millerjohn. I am the Deputy Program Director for the Bubbler here at Madison Public Library. And this is our first year having MakerCorps, and so we're excited.
Great. Thank you so much for your quick introductions. We'd now like to turn the mic back over to, how about starting with Rebecca over at MakeShop and the folks at MakeShop, and we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah. Hey, we are also joined by our third MakerCorps member. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
My name is Flora, and I'm an intern here at MakeCorps. And yeah, what did you say about yourself? Yeah. So hi.
Cool. Yeah, so we are a children's museum, which means that obviously we work with children here, but children don't come to places alone. They don't drive and stuff. So we have a lot of intergenerational interactions here. We talked a little bit yesterday as a group about just like what some of those things are that stand out as maybe activities that we find either are really easy to engage multiple ages in or very difficult. So we were thinking that maybe we could share a little bit of that, if that sounds good. Cool. You guys want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that as far as like intergenerational activities go, there are certain things that really stick out to me. I think one of the best examples I think is sewing. Sewing is just such a and it's an activity with such a long history that it is just naturally intergenerational. People have grandparents who had their grandparents teach them how to sew. And so when a kid comes in and is really excited about sewing, naturally the parents automatically, if they have a connection to it, it really brings that out, and they're like, oh, let me tell you about how my mom taught me how to sew, or you know, this, it kind of just brings about those natural connections. Something where working with, for example, we do another activity where it's recycled materials, so it's working a lot with cardboard. That doesn't have the same appeal as sewing, which has a long honored tradition. So it's a little bit easier sometimes to engage when there is that sort of tradition, or it's a cultural kind of movement already.
Yeah. What about maybe some of the types of like parent interactions that you folks have had in this space? I know that we talk a lot, since we do have so many parent interactions, about sort of the different types of engagement that parents have and how to leverage those things.
Mm-hmm. Totally. There's a lot of different parents that I've interacted with. There's the really involved parents who really just take charge, or if they don't take charge, they're just very invested in what their kids are doing, which is really awesome. We also have the other end of the spectrum, where there's parents who really aren't really interested, or they're just kind of there in the space but not really participating. And something that I was thinking about, a way that I could reach out to them too, is just to kind of point out that they could do a project alongside their kids too. We had a couple a mom the other day. She's making a hamster, and her daughter was also making a hamster, so they're just kind of doing hamsters together. And it was great because the daughter loved it. She loved being there with her mom, and they both really enjoyed their time there. And it was one of the best moments I could see, like a mom and a daughter working together. One of the best experiences I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also see that a lot where a parent wants to take over the project and really wants to just kind of like, no, you need to do it this way. And so I think Lydia touched on a really important point, which is encouraging the parent to start their own project alongside, and say like, oh, well, wouldn't you like to like maybe start your own hamster, that sort of thing, where they can really do it what their vision is, and let their child kind of continue to do what they are. Because I do notice that a lot where the parent has now completely taken over and the child is just kind of looking around, isn't really invested anymore. So yeah, like kind of encouraging separate, but there's still a little interplay in between them.
Yeah, I think especially in sewing, because it could be tricky for children. So like a lot of times, and it takes a lot of time. So so sometimes the parent just wants to speed up and then take over.
Yep.
Yeah.
That happens.
Happens a lot. Yeah.
So one of the things that we do as an organization and have been doing with MakerCore is we also talk a lot about what are some of the strategies that we can use to kind of subvert these or encourage certain things that we enjoy. So I think you touched on some of them, of talking about like, well, why don't you work alongside if you're taking over, or having certain tasks that maybe the parent is really good at. I don't know if you have had this experience, but sometimes giving a like homework task, like, why don't you cut out all of the little pieces while the kid works, is one of those ways to do that. And I don't want to take all the time, but I did want to mention too that we work with a graduate program at Carnegie Mellon, which Flora is a student at. And this past semester, we actually tasked them with like, how do we think about parent engagement? And they were working on a project that's still kind of in process, but trying to identify like different types of people, like the observer or the uninitiated, these different kinds of personalities that we might see. So they were thinking about it with adults, but we actually see it with all ages. And so these have been kind of fun. The drive-by learner, the person who wants to just, they're really confident, but they don't really have any patience. There might be the one who's like, let's do all the things and then leave. And so these have been fun to use as discussion points for how do you identify those different types of parents, and what are their kids like, and how do those two go together, and how do you get them to cooperate or to not interrupt each other? So, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. If we could pass the mic on over to Lindsay at Children's Creativity Museum, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. So what we do at the museum, so we focus on the age range of 2 to 12, and we also often get like older siblings, like teens. And within our museum, we follow the 3 C's as part of our educational philosophy. So communication, collaboration, and creativity. So that mindset follows us throughout each exhibit in our museum. So a great example is our animation studio. So in that exhibit, we have building clay characters using armatures and then making a stop-motion animation movie. So that exhibit tends to be geared towards all ages. So we'll have younger children that are like 2 or 3. So maybe with them, instead of using like a wire armature, we would focus on making snakes and snails, little planets, making small pieces, like small little ears to put on a clay ball. So that way it can be like a small cat or just a very simple character. And with older kids, then we would focus more on using armature. So we would have them think about, how would you pose your character? And sometimes as the educator, we might even act it out. And in a way, we call ourselves creative consultants, is the way I call ourselves, because we're kind of asking questions. We're prompting these questions about, what kind of character do you want to make? I want to make an animal. What's your favorite animal? I like dogs. What color is your ideal dog? Purple, yellow. And then sometimes I will bring the parents in or the caregiver into the conversation. Say, what do you think? Maybe what should we make with the dog? Like, what can be a friend for a dog? So it's kind of like a natural introduction, introducing the caregiver, parent, family, or whoever's present with the youth, with the children. So that way they start to become involved. So then we kind of like establish a plan within the first couple minutes of entering the room in animation studio. So once they start, and then as an educator, what I do is I start to teach them how to build a clay character, pose the armature, and then kind of give them an overview of how the room works. So to check in with educators if they need colors. So we have like things like called guts clay, so it's like recycled colors that we have in the center of the table with armatures. And then we kind of show them where the colors are. And once they kind of get started, we let them know that when they're finished, they can make a stop motion animation with us. So that in a nutshell is like a quick overview of how I would like engage everyone in the family, or caregivers for that matter. There are some exhibits that we have, on the other hand, that are geared towards older children, because we have such a big early childhood audience here at the museum that naturally we're going to have like a lot of younger children that are like 3 or 4 going to exhibits that are geared towards like 5 and up. So for example, another one is called Tech Lab. So in there we have a robot coding exhibit where we use Wonder Workshop's Dash and Dot robots. And with those robots, some of the basic design challenges we give are like programming the robot through a maze, for example, and that would require a little bit more reading because you're giving and fine motor skills even with, because we use an iPad. So like with a young child, they might have trouble, you know, using their finger to move even the blocks they snap together to create a program. So in that exhibit, that's where it starts to become more challenging on how to engage, you know, a sibling that has like a 10-year-old, and then there's younger sibling that's 2 or 3. And in that room, we have like a robot where it's like with a xylophone, so it's kind of coding with color. So if you tap on the red, it'll make the C# note. It'll make this note. So then they can kind of learn giving a set of instructions to the robot through color and music. So that's something that could be a good introduction to younger children. And then because we have a lot of people that come back, so we have an audience that actually has grown up with the museum, so maybe they come back every week because we have a lot of early childhood programming or just weekend programming. So sometimes they can move on to the next part of the exhibit, which is coding.
Looks like
it looks like
Lindsay.
we've lost Lindsay really quickly. Oh, here, she's hopped back on.
Your audio cut out for a bit there, Lindsay. If you could just take us back maybe 10.
Okay, sorry about that. So just going back, so starting from the xylophone with the robot, the next level that I might work with like a younger child is introducing the color. So the program we use for the coding is called Blockly, very similar to Scratch, Tinker, or any visual drag and drop block-based programming application or software. So with that, I might introduce colors like this teal color, this greenish color is drive. Or sometimes in the past what I've done is I'll say D for drive. So if you go into D for drive, what is the first letter of this? F for forward. And then that's what I would start to include the caregiver or parent, because then they find this an avenue to teach their children coding. And so, and then also in that, and I'll just kind of wrap up with this thought process. So from there, what I might do is, because in the room, in all these rooms we have chairs and seating, I tend to actually get chairs for everybody in the room. So I kind of say, let's take a seat over here at the table, and then I make sure everybody has a seat. So that includes all children, youth, caregivers and family. So I kind of invite everyone to engage and play, and I'll even hand them an iPad or hand them an armature and animators, so that way they can all engage and immediately be immersed.
Cool, thank you. All right, let's finish up this portion of it with Rebecca at the Bubbler.
Hi. So the Bubbler is kind of unique in its makerspace in the fact that it's not necessarily a makerspace. We kind of, with MakerCore, are taking makerspaces to all 9 of our public libraries here in Madison. And I think that that's one of the really strong pieces that we have for encouraging intergenerational making, is the fact that we are not necessarily like a place where you would go and expect to kind of like drop off your kid or to have that be the case. It's like a lot of the parents that we're engaging are there in the library interacting with their children, and they were planning on doing that anyway. Like, we were going to go to the library today to read books. Now there's a maker activity set up here. We're going to do that as well. And then we have our MakerCore members encouraging parents to stay, encouraging grandparents to stay, to interact with their children in order to do those sort of maker activities. When organizing all of these traveling maker kits to all of the different libraries, I was really adamant that we didn't have them squirreled away in community rooms and meeting rooms in the libraries. I sat down with all of our managers and really made the case to be able to have them in our children's sections for that exact reason, because we wanted kids to be able to be engaged, to come up and ask what was going on, and then have their parents also sit down and have that happen. And then one of the things that our MakerCore members are doing is a lot of the kits that we were using before MakerCore came on were already designed. I was doing the research, I was designing them, but when our MakerCore members came on, we had these amazing teaching artists who were kind of getting to know the kits and getting to know the processes, and they actually created like illustrated interactive instructions. So like, they have the picture of all of the different things that are happening throughout the process, and we have them for all of our different maker kits right now, which is really great, and we're able to share them. I keep telling people we're going to share them, and it's really true, to put them up on our website so that people can use their kits and have them to move along. But what we're noticing is our kids don't care about the illustrated instructions. They care about all the materials in front of them, and they want to get their hands on it, and they want to get involved. But a lot of our parents really like having something in their hands to be like, oh, I know what's going on, and I can kind of like look at this and kind of guide my child through the process, because we're also seeing that as our MakerCore members are around in the libraries more often, they're becoming more popular, which is great. And so we're having like 15 kids at a time. We only have one MakerCore member. Everyone's starting at different times because it's a drop-in program. And so they're like getting them started on the activity, helping the kids get started, and then kind of sending them with their caregiver to continue the process and asking questions as they go along. Which is really fun. And we actually have people come up to our tables and grab stuff and then go find a hole somewhere in the library, like against a bookshelf or in the stacks, to go work on their project together. And so they don't necessarily even have to be sitting at the table with our MakerCore members. So there's like making, pop-up making happening in all over the children's sections in our libraries, which is really fun. So I think that the location was really big. I think that having the instructions were really big. But I have to agree with my friends in Pittsburgh that the specific activities are really great. So we have sock monsters, which is like making a sock monkey, but it's a sock monster, and it's a sewing skill. And we actually have a lot of parents who it is a traditional activity, but they've never sewn before in their lives. And so we're showing them how to thread needles, and then they're like, oh, okay, I've got it. And so then they're kind of going through and learning the different process together, which is really exciting. And when we're seeing that in some of our kits that use basic circuitry as well, that they're kind of working alongside to do their own project with their child because they think that it's really fun or really exciting. And then another thing that we're moving towards is we also don't want our parents to be taking over the activity from their kids. We want them to be working alongside, or more than that, we also just want them to be observing what's happening. And so we're working on some questions kind of to help, I think evaluate's the wrong term, but we want some questions that allow kids to start a narrative and a dialogue around what they're making, because what we're noticing is that The kids, you can give them a goal, and you're like, you're making this, and they don't care. They just want to get their hands on the materials. They just want to make something really cool. But after they've created it, so like after they've created their sock monster or they've created their circuit, they want to tell you the story about the thing that they have made. And so we're coming up with questions that we can use as MakerCore members and as facilitators, but also that we can hand to parents to say, like, you want your child, like, this is a great way to start storytelling with your kid. So like when your child is making their sock monster, ask them why they're making the choices that they're making. Ask them why the sock monster has to have 4 eyes, because it's really important that they have 4 eyes. And like, what is the story and the narrative around it? So it kind of also stops our parents from saying like, oh, that's nice, or oh, that's pretty, or oh, you did a good job, instead of like, tell me about what you've made, tell me how you made it, tell me why you made it, to kind of start that facilitation with them as well. And so that's the way we're moving. We're still like just in the beginning stages, but we're really excited to see like some of the stories that we have to tell for parents and kids that way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
This has all been so awesome and interesting and very exciting. We'll move into some questions that we have. I also want you all to feel free to interact with each other, so if anyone has brought up in their little own presentation kind of struck a question in you, or yeah, us too, and you want to share more, feel free to unmute and jump in at any time.
But I can start us off. I do have a question, and we've touched upon this a bit, and it goes to what Rebecca at Madison was just talking about, which is kind of like what kind of role can you get the parent or caregiver in, and in that last iteration you have this idea of the parent or caregiver as like the facilitator of the project. I kind of want to flip that and ask you guys if you have any strategies for kind of reversing the roles and getting the kid or the child in the position of not exactly teacher, but as the one who's not only telling about their project, but the how of their project and the how of what they're doing. So yeah, I want to open that up to you guys.
Is there anyone who?
This makes me think a little bit that one other project that we've been working on is with a local university. It's called Simple Interactions, and we've been actually having some people recording video clips of facilitators in the space, and then as a group we watch them and talk about what we see in the clip. And this sort of question of how do you get them to maybe teach each other. We recently watched a clip of Lydia where this one was specifically 2 girls of slightly different age, but she kind of used this strategy where she was having one explain to the other. Have you folks found that in, especially like the circuitry stuff with parents as well? Do you feel like that's something you might want to be able to talk about?
Yeah, totally. It's really helpful when you're working together. This also was really relevant for siblings too, because they like to push each other. Older siblings like to help younger siblings. And it's usually not as direct as if parents were kind of doing it, which is kind of interesting. But it's really, I have a lot of fun when I'm in the spaces trying to make like little community groups and just being like, okay, here's a few of us who are just learning together. And because sometimes kids don't really interact in the museum with other kids, sometimes they want to just focus on their own thing, and that's totally cool. But it's really enjoyable to be like, hey, what did you learn here? Can you explain it? Because if they're able to explain it, then it shows that they are really processing it. Because there's one thing, you can totally imitate someone. You can see what they're doing and just make the same connections with circuit blocks and not really get what's happening. But when you explain to another child, or when they're given the opportunity to show it, they tend to appreciate it more. They tend to understand it better. It's a lot of fun too. I think it's more fun too that way.
Totally. Also going along to the same end as what Lydia was talking about, I prefer, I guess I try as much as possible to keep kind of if the metaphor works, the ball in their court. I noticed, like, as a teacher, and as, like, I feel like most teachers have the ability to talk, like, nonstop about the thing, because it's just very naturally interesting. So I have a tendency to just run on and on and on. And so I need to constantly stop myself, and I make sure that I want the person that I'm teaching, the child, whether it's a parent or child, I want them to be talking more than I'm talking. I want them to, like, most of the talking should be by them. So I try to ask really, really open-ended questions. One of my favorite questions that I learned from my more experienced coworkers was, tell me about what you're doing. Or, like, what are you up to? Like, what are you getting into? Something like that, where it's just, like, super open-ended. It's not like, what are you doing? It's not, like, accusatory. It's mostly just like, tell me about it. Like, what's in your head? Like, what are you thinking about? What's your process like? Very similar to what Rebecca in Madison, I think, yeah. What she was saying, you know, like, tell me about your process, you know, and it really does kind of put the ball in their court. It's not like, are you doing a running stitch? Like, like, I'm not relating what they're doing to what I'm trying to teach. I'm just asking them putting it on their side of the field, I guess, you know, rather than trying to bring it towards me. And I think that the more you can do that, like Lydia said, it's much more beneficial for them if they can relate it and if they can kind of explain it themselves. But also with teaching each other. For example, this morning I was teaching two siblings how to sew, and the older sibling was, like, really, really getting it, and the younger sibling was having some struggles. And rather than me directly try to instruct the younger sibling, I was like, hey, it looks like your older brother is, like, really doing well. Like, can you maybe teach your younger brother, like, what you're doing? You know, like, how maybe show him why it's working for you. You know, and I think that, like, really, really, not only it was just very beneficial for both of them. One, he got to teach what he was learning, and then the other one, he maybe got it in a more relatable way, in a way that maybe he's more comfortable with, because it's his brother that he's more familiar with. And so I think that's really, really effective, is when you can get somebody else to teach for you.
I want to add to the sibling thing, like, we have this circuit block areas, and, like, when like older kids, they are really engaged some more complicated parts, and then I see many times that the older kids just push their younger sisters or brothers away. Like, you have all this different stuff you can deal with, but they don't know what to do. So it's a good thing that you said you can teach what you're doing, something like that. So yeah, I think great.
Great, thank you all. I'm going to move on to the next question. Feel free to answer any of them if you haven't yet chimed in. But we opened up on the online forum a thread about this summer session last week, and Reina Cabezas from the Alameda County Office of Education had some really interesting kind of just thoughts that she shared. I'm not sure if you all were able to see it, but I'll do my best to summarize it. But she was talking about, when we were thinking about multi-generational making, and I think it goes a lot to what's been said about sewing already, that a lot of communities have been making and repurposing things for a long time, not out of, like, the new trend of making, but just kind of out of necessity because of situations, because of their situation. And so her question and her kind of musing was, how do you honor that and leverage that, the knowledge and the kind of practice that may already be happening in a lot of the communities who come through your space, while kind of, does that work into your programming? And when those parents are actually there, how does that influence it? And as I mentioned, I think that we've heard a little bit from when Kyle's initial talking about sewing and the kind of tradition behind sewing, but I'm curious if anyone else has seen kind of that expertise of repurposing that is traditional in communities, and how you kind of work with it.
So I'll jump in. So Maker Corps is only one part of what the Bubbler is doing this summer, and it's like we're using our fabulous Maker Corps members to really make these like traveling workshops happen at all of our different spaces. But our main form of programming that we do in the libraries through the Bubbler is actually invite artists from the community to come in and kind of share their craft. And I think that really having those like open lines of communication with people who live within your community that have those ideas or those traditions that they want to share has been really amazing for encouraging that intergenerational piece for us. So for instance, he moved away and he got a fellowship to go back to school for his MFA. But we had this fantastic artist named Julio Flores who made traditional kites. Like his grandfather taught him how to make in Puerto Rico when he was a young boy. And so he was really passionate about having kids and families come in to make kites and to learn about the tradition and also like to interact in intergenerational ways that way. And so that's not something that we ever would have come up with on our own. And so I think like being aware of how big of a community that you live in and all of the traditions that exist that are there and finding ways to reach out to those individuals has been really, really important for us to being able to set up those types of experiences for our families. And that's something that we're continuing to do as we continue to grow our program here in Madison.
Following up on that, you talked about kind of open lines of communication with the community to get those experiences. What are some of the strategies that you've implemented to start and maintain those community conversations?
So this is actually probably the most influential thing we've done is when we repurposed spaces in our new building about 3 years ago, we have an art gallery. And we have people who are applying to be in our different galleries and in our different gallery spaces, and that is a great way because people want to show off their art for us to like even just know who's around in our community, because we have people coming to us with these amazing projects that we didn't even know existed. And so like just having that space as an availability is really awesome. And then another thing that we do is we've started a series of Saturday sessions called Meet Your Makers, where we are inviting artists to come in and actually set up in the Bubbler space to share some of the things that they have made and then do an interactive program with children and families. So it's less formal than having like a formal art gallery, but it is a place for them to kind of show off what they've done. And we've reached out to community craft organizations that we know already exist. Like we live in Wisconsin, so we have a cheesemaker who's part of like the Get Culture cheese making club in Madison because they have a club. And so knowing what those organizations are and working with them. And we're also really, it's beneficial working in a library because we have community engagement librarians who are working with community groups who want to just come in and use our space for meeting rooms or other things. And they're like, this sounds really cool. Have you talked to the people in the Bubbler? And so I think like being open and available with the space and the community groups that you're there and just providing the space has been really helpful for us.
Cool. That's all awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in on any of the questions that have kind of been posed so far, or if you want to follow up with each other questions amongst yourself. We'll take a pause from talking and see if anyone jumps at that. It's always a little awkward with the multiple mics and videos.
Yeah, so I thought Rebecca from Madison brought up some really interesting points. I really liked the kite maker idea, and I think especially with some of these like more traditional crafts, I don't want to go back to sewing again, but that's a really good example. And I think that for me, I'm tapping in, like I learned how to sew when I started here, like for like just a month and a half ago. So when somebody comes in and they're like, I've been sewing dresses, you know, or like I understand that I just need to completely remove my ego from the equation. Like I need to take the back seat. I'm no longer the teacher. And I think another good example to get away from sewing is our circuit blocks. We have just these different electronic motors and wires connecting to batteries. And we have a lot of people come in who are in the field of electronics, whether they're electricians or something like that. So they have a huge wealth of experience in that field. And so whenever I come across somebody like that, I just immediately I want to ask them questions. Tell me about this. What is this for you? How do you approach this? And kind of, I think, taking a back seat is important. If I was making kites one day and all of a sudden he comes in and says oh, my grandfather taught me how to make kites, I just immediately have this feeling of tell me everything you know, tell me how, what am I doing wrong, tell me how to make kites better. And I think that that's a really good way of tapping into those cultural traditions, is to kind of have completely open arms and just be well, can you teach me more about sewing? Because I compared to you, I don't really know what I'm doing. So I think that that's important, is to kind of get rid of your ego as much as you can and just kind of open yourself up to not being a teacher all the time. I feel like being a teacher is 50% also being a learner as well. So I think that that's important, and it allows you to tap into those cool things like kite making that you never would have expected, but wouldn't have been there if you didn't kind of open yourself up to that opportunity. That's what I gotta say. I'm really dying down.
Great, thank you. Anyone else before we kind of begin to wrap this up?
Sure. So, in the museum context here at the Children's Creativity Museum, we're really fortunate to kind of share a really large front and backyard with local museums. We're part of the Yerba Buena community, so we have museums like the Contemporary Jewish Museum. We have the Mexican Museum that's being made, the SF MoMA. So we're really fortunate to have all these really amazing neighbors where we often collaborate and have events at each other's spaces. In the past, we also have done things like Dia de los Muertos here at the museum. So in collaboration with the Mexican Museum and the Smithsonian, we hosted a Day of the Dead Museum Day. It also paired with our museum's birthday. So we had a combination of making paper flowers, making these light-up dioramas, so kind of like an altar that was a collaborative effort. So we had educators that were teaching visitors what does Dia de los Muertos mean, and there was different activities to kind of create a path in a sense. So it was a cultural understanding by each activity that you would accomplish. So we had educators from different museums. We had professional development from the Smithsonian for us. So we were able to bring up kind of all come together with this community, a cultural community event, to kind of work with our own community as well in San Francisco, as well as attracting people in outside the Bay Area, or even people across the Bay, in Oakland or South Bay in San Jose. We had a lot of people coming down for this event, and we've also had events where we would work with, I'm trying to remember, drawing a blank on the other events, but that one in particular is the one that kind of comes to mind. And with our Maker Corps members, we're kind of doing something a little bit different. So as a previous Maker Corps member myself, I've been trying to make it my goal to teach my Maker Corps members about tech ed. A lot of Maker Corps members I've been bringing on are more traditional artists. So some of them might be an amazing oil painter, or I might have somebody that has a lot of experience with graphic design and app development, but they don't have any sort of experience with circuits. So in a way, bringing them into our space has been very helpful, because I'm able to teach them things like lighting up an LED, or doing paper circuits, or teaching them squishy circuits, and then I kind of arm them with the knowledge, so then from there they kind of take it into their own hands, and they're able to create amazing workshops. Actually, my former Maker Corps, so I have a current Maker Corps member that was actually an education intern with us, and she and I kind of collaborated on a project called Musical Puppet Parade. So we had that project during Lunar New Year, so the beginning of Lunar New Year. So we have Chinatown that's really close by. It's probably a 15-minute walk maybe 20 minutes from our museum. So we had a special event where we had an all-day activity where you got to make a puppet, so an animal puppet. So sometimes families would work together to make a really large lion puppet. And what was cool was it made music. So you connect the puppet to a makey, and you're able to play music. So, and then I laser cut this mini Chinatown, SF Chinatown, and then you got to play the puppet, behind or in front of or behind the Chinatown paper cut. So, and visitors also got to make their own sound effects, and it was like a really cool, collaboration with my Maker Corps member. I mean, it was even before she was a Maker Corps member, but that was like one of the defining moments where I had to have her as part of our team. But that's kind of how we've been working in terms of community, in terms of programming with other museums, or even just with education interns.
Great, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you all for sharing your kind of perspectives and your experiences thus far. I want to give you all a chance to any last, we do want to wrap up, respect everyone's time, but if there's any last pieces you wanted to get out, now is the time to do so. For anyone watching live or on the recorded version, we are going to continue this over at the online community. We'll be in the thread for the summer session number 5 and kind of recap and keep the conversation going, so make sure you check us out there too. But we'll give each of you either an opportunity just to sign off, say goodbye, or add some last burning piece of wisdom. So we'll start with Pittsburgh, go over to Madison, and we'll finish in San Francisco.
I think one little last thing is that, like Lindsay was saying about kind of having those connections and things, is that something that happens here, and this relates to a bunch of different things that everybody was saying, is that that's a great way to engage parents too, is that, for example, like we have somebody on staff who was a history major. He just loves history. He loves like the cultural context of things, and so when he's, for example, working with circuits, that's one thing that he does to include parents, is even if they're not actively participating, he'll be like, you remember Walkmans, and that gives them maybe an opportunity to share something about like their childhood with the kid. The kid's like, I have never heard that word before, so it gives them like a contextual, generational understanding of each other a little bit. But similarly, everybody comes with different kind of interests and backgrounds, and that is a great way that even if a parent is maybe not engaged in the same activity as a kid, that I found that if I suddenly discover that they have the same taste in books that I do, or they've been on a cool vacation, that can sometimes help influence things, or even just start a conversation that's a bonding experience, even if it's not about making. So just wanted to chime in with that. Sign off?
Yeah.
Yeah. This was really fun.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed kind of the back and forth. It's cool. I haven't been as active with the online community, so it's cool to meet some of the other makers in Madison, San Francisco, and you guys are in California too, I believe. Very cool. Yeah.
I'm so glad that all 4 of you were able to join the call from Pittsburgh. It's fun to have a mix of Maker Corps and Maker Corps members and supervisors. So thank you for joining in.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Rebecca?
Sure. We just had an announcement come on over, so I was like giving it a second before I unmuted my button. I mean, one of the last thing that I will also say is I think it's really amazing how often adults, when like their kids are doing an activity, will be like, oh, I'm not a creative person. And like how often that even just comes out of their mouth. And so I have really just kind of told my Maker Corps members when that happens is to just hand them something. It's like, oh, that's okay, here. And then like just kind of let it go and not have that be the case. And so I think it's just like being friendly, but also just like, it's like I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm going to hand you something and kind of see what happens. And then also being like, wow, look at what you guys made together, and being able to show that off. And I think that the parents feel an incredible sense of pride as well, especially if it's like a skill like sewing that they don't know anything about, that they feel like they've learned something too. So that's the last thing I'll say. This was great. Thanks, guys.
Cool, thank you. We'll finish with you, Lindsay.
Awesome. So I think one thing that I recommend for everyone whether you're working with like younger visitors, you know, maybe teens, or with, you know, teens with caregivers and adults, or, you know, all ages. I think the most important thing to kind of include everyone is humor. Having a sense of humor always makes a big difference. An example of this is we have a video game design workshop called with Bloxels, and how I explain, like, when you build the world, so you have, like, think of it as kind of like building a Mario-like world, so you have like the terrain on the bottom so you can't fall through. So sometimes with children, I try to include a little sense of humor where I say, well, what would happen if you didn't have any terrain? And they'd be like, well, I would fall. And I'd be like, yes, you would fall to your doom. So would a video game where you fall to your doom be fun? No, it would not be fun. So then, you know, including, you know, lines like facilitation where it's a little funny definitely includes the parent, and, you know, they have a very good time as well. So then they become engaged. They suddenly start to tune in and listen. So, you know, that's definitely one of, you know, my advice for any educator out there, to kind of have a little sense of humor with facilitation and interests.
Cool. Thank you
great.
all
Thank you so
much.
We hope to continue this over in the online community. Thanks again for everyone who joined us, and we'll see you again soon.
All right. Take care.